Quarks selling corpses. That's not quite the macabre situation it seems, as owning a portion of someone's desiccated remains is considered a compliment to the deceased, as well as a nice little earner. The corpse in question is the Ferengi who caused the rise of holosuites, or possibly the guy who nicked the idea. Either way, he's the one who got rich off it, and that's what counts. Even Odo's interested in owning a piece. That probably should have put Quark on red alert, but there's latinum in his line of sight, and that has a way of changing priorities. Odo wants to be sure of who he's getting and listens to Quark's patter about official seals to prove whose dust is in the container. How odd then that Odo recently spoke to the person this is supposed to be, alive and well on another planet. Quark swears he's been scammed and even looks upset enough for it to possibly be true. Odo's investigation might be delayed though, as he's got a visitor. Meet Dr. Mora, the Bajoran scientist who was assigned to study Odo when he was found. Odo's thrown by this meeting being sprung on him without warning. As Quark goes off to fetch tea, Mora starts questioning Odo's appearance and asking whether his clothes are clothes or him. Odo seems unimpressed. Quark returns with a drink and questions. Learning their background makes Quark refer to Mora as Odo's dad, something that makes both of them a little awkward. Going on to then compliment Odo's skill, albeit in an attempt to either hasten or influence a certain fraudulent corpse investigation, is too much for Odo, and he leaves with Mora. Mora thinks this rude and references Odo's difficulties interacting with others, though drops it when he's told Quark is a crook and gets to the real reason he's here. He wants to start what he calls the work again, namely understanding who and what Odo is. He knows that's what Odo wants too, despite the understandable negative association with life in a lab, and he's here with a proposition. Dr. Mora may be a dickbag with boundary issues, but he knows his propositions. That's why Odo turns up at Sisko's quarters and asks for a mega shuttle. He wants to go on a jaunt to the Gamma Quadrant, Dr. Mora having brought word that a Bajoran probe has found traces of DNA very similar to Odo's on a planet it surveyed. Sounds sciencey, so we've had the good sense to send Dax along with them, as well as another Bajoran lad. There's some talk about Odo's early life and the discovery that he was sentient, something Mora had no idea of until Odo deliberately copied a piece of lab equipment to make his point. That Mora speaks over Odo as he attempts to tell the story is not appreciated by Odo, though Mora saying that working with him was the most satisfying experience of his career gets a look of interest. We'll have to hear the rest of it later as we've arrived at the planet in question, and one that looks a wee bit rough to boot. Earthquakes and possible volcanoes means it's potentially very dangerous, so let's all teleport down at the same time rather than leave someone on the ship to rescue the others if shit goes south. I guess we're following Starfleet health and safety rules then? Anywho, we're in ruins of some sort, and one with a giant painting of a valley in the background. They're not interested in it though, instead paying attention to a stone pillar. It's actually a stele from the looks of things, an ornamental tablet of sorts, and it being on a raised paved area suggests it's important. So important, in fact, that Dax wants us to nick it, so we can run the inscriptions through our computer. I'd have just taken some photos personally, but maybe we can get Quark to auction it, like those other stolen Gamma Quadrant artifacts. The other Bajoran guy with us, who we learn is a doctor, though presumably not medical, is off gathering samples of a powder. He says it's silicon-based plant life and it's active. Looks like it's iron filings being moved with a magnet to me, but I'm not a doctor. Regardless, we're going to take that with us too, as he thinks it's what we're looking for. Dax has the computer on the mega shuttle teleport the stele up and, in a fascinating coincidence, everything starts shaking. Resetting the teleporter to leave takes a moment, during which the ground starts farting at them. Odo doesn't have lungs, so he's dandy, but the other three are struggling. He's the only one still standing when the teleporter is ready and orders the computer to grab them all. We're back at the station and getting treatment for those planet farts. Dr. Mora and Dr. Other Guy are having a worse time of it than Dax, possibly because she's Trill, thinks Bashir. Both stele and iron filings plant have been moved to a lab, so Odo goes to check on them. There are significantly more of the latter now, and O'Brien tells us the computer's struggling to figure out exactly what we've found. We've the good sense to stick a force field round it at least until someone can do a science to it. The chance doesn't come. Sisko's called to the lab during the night and finds the place in ruins. The pop-o-matic bubble containing the bulk of the iron filings is broken, apparently folded out from the inside. Either someone's done a great job disguising a robbery, or we have an escaped shape-shifting plant. Signs point to the latter, as the lab was still sealed. Sealed is a relative term, however, as it looks like a vent might have been used to scarper, Cardigan security being on a par with Starfleet, it seems. Dax is up and about at least and has come to help, against Bashir's orders, mind, which is probably a disciplinary matter. She also brings news that Dr. Mora is awake, so Odo goes for a chat. Odo brings him up to speed with all the data we have, and says trashing the lab suggests it's not intelligent. Mora tells him not to discount the possibility, advice perhaps influenced by his own failure to see Odo's intelligence many years ago. Oh, and Dr. Other Guy is still unconscious, just to let us all know that the writers haven't forgotten about him. In the absence of any other leads, and with scans being worthless thanks to the iron-filing creature's constant changing, the best option we have is to follow its path through the vents. O'Brien's given the job, possibly because everybody else has watched Alien and knows how that works out for Captain Dallas. There's an update from security footage while he crawls, though it's not exactly useful. The cameras stopped working for just under a minute, cause unknown, and that's when shit kicked off. There was also an increase in temperature during that time. We'll have to ponder that later, as the trail has led O'Brien to noise, and the noise leads him to goop. Whatever our life form was, it's now a dead form. We've got teams searching other ventilation just to be sure, but nothing's been found. Bashir suspects the different environment here, one with lower carbon dioxide, is what ultimately killed our iron filing plant. Dax wants Dr. Mora's input, something Bashir thinks he'll be well enough to give tomorrow, so she rejects yet another one of Bashir's advances and leaves instead. That means he's alone, not including unconscious people, when he's attacked by something betentacled. Being thrown against a cart gives him a chance to grab a laser scalpel and use it, all while Dr. Mora is waking up and watching. There's not much to see, probably because CGI was still very expensive back in 1994, and the amorphous blob buggers off back into the air vents while Bashir calls for help. We learn little when the cavalry arrives. Bashir was too busy getting choked to see anything beyond that it was big, and isn't even sure if he injured it. One thing he does remember, after being prompted by Odo, is that the room was a little warmer than normal, so maybe that'll be a way to track it. Dax has also found a residue of some kind that might be able to do the same. Regardless, we've got a blob on the loose, and now we know it's aggressive, intentional or not, so we're locking the whole place down. Here's hoping we catch it before it figures out having most of the station confined to quarters gives it a series of captive snacks. Odo goes off to do his job and is followed by Dr. Mora. Perhaps prompted by Cisco using constable as a term of endearment, he compliments Odo himself and points out the similarities between scientific examination and criminal investigations. It ends with Mora saying he's proud of Odo, something that's shrugged off with a grunt. The glance afterwards suggests he's not as unbothered by this as he pretends. Odo's checking on progress. Still no joy from the computer on either DNA analysis of the residue or translating the Steely we nicked. Before he leaves, Odo comments on it having moved too, and Dax says she shifted it because it was in the way. Could be a plot element, could be someone on the production team covering their arse because it was interfering with filming. Dr. Mora sticks around to help out and wants to know if our new blob has anything in common with the iron filing goop that we're assuming died in the vents. While the computer does a science, he asks about Odo. It becomes more of a confessional, and he tells Dax that they parted on bad terms, him convinced that Odo wouldn't be able to survive on his own and would return to the lab. To be fair to the guy, he now seems of the opinion that he was wrong, and Odo made the right call in leaving. Reminiscing is brought to a close by some beeps from the computer. It's finished comparing and shows the results, our current blob having only the most basic similarities with whatever died in the vent. Dax runs the results for the current blob through the system to see if we get a match, something that'll take a couple of hours. That gives Dr. Mora a chance to go see Odo again. Dr. Other Guy is still alive and well, by the way, just in case you'd forgotten about him, and Odo notes Mora isn't as pleased by the news as he should be. That's not because of Dr. Other Guy, but something he just learned. Dax may not have recognized the results for the new blob and needed to check against their database, but that's because she didn't dedicate years to studying it. You see, the new blob does have a match, and his name is Odo. The breakout at the lab and the attack of Bashir were roughly 16 hours apart, which just so happens to be Odo's regeneration cycle, and he just so happens to have been in liquid form when they occurred. Mora suggests Odo may be responsible. More than that, he asks if this might not be new, unsolved crimes from the past possibly being his fault. And he says none of the people Odo knows will understand, telling him they'll lock him up somewhere and forget about him, or worse. Odo thinks it might instead be connected with the planet farts that knocked out everybody but him earlier, and Mora says that's a possibility too. It'll need checking, and the only sensible option, he says, is to come back to the lab, a suggestion that leaves Odo very upset indeed. It's a hell of a choice for someone he suspects of being the amorphous tentacle monster, and Odo responds by turning into Nutella chocolate spread, while Mora legs it. A power failure in Odo's office has Kira sending some security to check, and O'Brien noticing more power drains in the conduit above it makes them think shutting off the juice might slow it down. The security team reports nothing from Odo's office, just as Mora reaches Ops to tell everybody what's going on. He now agrees it was probably the gas and thinks Odo isn't in control. He's also concluded the lab incident was to try and save the iron filing creature we kidnapped, and the attack on Bashir was actually because he was there. Odo might not be in control, but it's clear he's acting on some unresolved personal issues. Now all we've got to do is stop him. O'Brien wheels out our old sci-fi friend of reversing the polarity and suggests that might do something to the force fields. We'll need bait, of course, and rather than some tasty energy, Dr. Mora suggests himself. Inverted polarity science bollocks might not be enough though, so we're breaking out the guns. This is Star Trek though, so obviously that means the most important character needs to be nearest the danger. Either that or Sisko doesn't want to pass up an opportunity for some pooping. He also gives the order to use a kill setting if stun doesn't work, which is probably going to result in quite an awkward conversation if Odo survives. It ends up not being necessary. Odo Blob falls from the ceiling and morphs his way into a force field. Polarity things do polarity things, and he thrashes about a bit. Then we turn it off, and an Odo-shaped Odo has a lie down. Odo's all fixed up. Well, probably. We've taken all of the planet fart out of him with some help from Dr. Mora, and he thinks that'll do it. I guess we'll find out in 16 hours. Mora himself is buggering off back to Bajor. Odo apologises for the attempted murder business, which feels generous under the circumstances, but Mora seems to understand now that he was the cause. He also asks Odo to stay in touch, a request that's well received, and will leave them to try and find common ground to build on until the next adventure. Those of you who've been here a while might be familiar with us exploring how children can be damaged, intentionally or not, by the actions of others. Tom Paris and B'Elanna Torres were the inaugural members of what became known as the Voyager Shit Parent Support Group, and by the end of the series, it had doubled in size to include Seven of Nine and Ramrod. I mention it here because this episode might be the founding of the Deep Space Nine Shit Parent Support Group, though you could argue that honour goes to Eggnog. Dr. Mora isn't Odo's dad, of course, as both of them rush to explain whenever it comes up, but that in itself is telling. Deflection, then, is one of our points today. Deflection from both of them when Quark calls Mora Odo's dad. Deflection towards Sisko, trying to relate with a memory of his own father being ill. Deflection when Mora points out that constable is a term of endearment. Deflection when Mora compliments him and says he's proud. It's mostly Odo, and with good reason because of the complicated feelings here, but I wonder if that's a learned response. Mora is actually the first one to try and correct Quark, and there's plenty to suggest he himself struggles with verbalizing and is only now doing so with Odo for the first time. There's certainly enough then to support the theory that it may not just be Mora's hairstyle that Odo has adopted. It's far from the awkward but ultimately all-positive reunion though, isn't it? Despite all the talk, despite the repentance, Mora still tries to use Odo's affliction to get him back in his lab. You could read this as him genuinely thinking that's what's best, but I don't buy it. Every experience Mora has had on the station shows Odo is accepted by those around him, welcomed in a way that Mora did not think possible. There's no evidence to support any sort of negative reaction from them when learning Odo's at the centre of the current problem. Talk of prisons and quarantines are bad enough, but mention of a zoo was deliberately aimed. The fear-mongering he tries to use against Odo about the people he knows is classic abusive manipulation, an attempt to isolate the target from support. At best, you could say he was hoping to redeem himself in Odo's eyes with a cure. At worst, he's just a controlling cockend, using this as an excuse to retake ownership. If we're generous, Mora's realization at the end goes a little way to his redemption. That doesn't undo the harm he caused, though, and Odo would have had every right to tell him to jog on. Just because someone is sorry doesn't mean you have to accept it. Odo does, though, albeit tentatively. I wonder if he squared the actions of Odo Blob against Mora's behaviour and considered them fair punishment, satisfying that innate need for justice. Perhaps he even sees this as the potential for rehabilitation, a constable in all aspects of his life. Before we go, a compliment to whoever moved the Steely in the lab. Maybe it was for production issues, like I suggested, maybe it was one of the red herrings that Michael Piller says he threw in deliberately, but Trek tends to have a problem with not doing anything that doesn't directly connect to the plot at hand, and that has the side effect of often undermining any mystery. Incidentally unimportant things then are to be welcomed whenever they come, and this one had me considering a number of options, from the Steely itself being a shapeshifter to Dax somehow being involved, possibly connected with her reacting slightly differently to the gas. A 40-ish minute show that needs to tell a whole and complete story tends to be pretty tight on timing, so wanting a few bits of random throwaway stuff can be a big ask, but the above demonstrates just how much of an effect even a few seconds can have on the flow of the whole story. End of episode.
How's this even possible? They say they're from the same ship as us, but we've never met them before.
I'm not sure. I've checked back over my records.
Your what?
My records, you know, my logs, from when I was the computer in Voyager.
Hold on, you still have all the logs and stuff from back then stored in your head?
Yes, but only when the plot needs me to.
Oh, how very Star Trek.
Anyway, I didn't find any reference to Astro Chien or Ordinator during my time on Voyager. I guess it could have happened after I ended up in this body, but that feels like the sort of thing people would talk about.
Well, they're news to me, and I made it my business to keep up with all rumours on ship.
Why?
Blackmail.
Oh, fair enough. So what do we do now?
Figure out how they could be on the same ship without us ever meeting them. There's gotta be something.
That's going to be difficult, as Voyager doesn't even get launched for another year.
We could check on crew, I guess. What's Janeway up to right now?
I'm not sure. Let's bring up her file.
Who the bloody hell's that?
That, my friend, is apparently Janeway.